cake was already on the table when my son told me I wasn't welcome. 3 tiers. White fondant with gold trim. I know because I paid for it, $1,200 from the bakery on Elmwood, that my daughter-in-law had circled in a magazine and left on my kitchen counter like a hint I was supposed to take. I took it. I always took the hints. That was my problem. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 of those years working double shifts at a chemical plant outside of Columbus, so my son could have the kind of life I never did. I'm not saying that to make myself sound noble. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I think a man deserves to at least say a true thing out loud before he starts talking about the rest of it. His name is Brandon. He's 34 now. When he was 7, he used to fall asleep in the passenger seat of my truck on the way home from his Little League games, and I'd carry him inside so his cleats wouldn't drag on the carpet. My ex-wife Linda, she left when he was 9. Packed a bag on a Tuesday and was gone by Thursday. No note. No phone call until 3 weeks later from her sister's place in Phoenix. Brandon cried for 6 months straight, and I held him through every single night of it. I'm telling you this so you understand what I mean when I say I gave that boy everything I had. I paid for his college, 4 years at Ohio State, roughly $112,000 when you count the room and board and the books and the 1 semester he decided he wanted to study abroad in Prague, which added another $9,000 I charged to a credit card I didn't finish paying off until he was 26. I paid for his first car, a used Honda Civic I had a mechanic friend look over first. I paid for the security deposit on his first apartment in Cincinnati. When he proposed to Vanessa, he called me from the jewelry store because he was $800 short on the ring he'd picked out, and I wired him the money within the hour. I didn't keep a ledger. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't building a case. I was just being his father. Vanessa came from money in a way that Brandon and I never did. Her parents had a house in Indian Hill, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns look like golf courses and nobody has a car older than 3 years in the driveway. Her father, Warren, was a semi-retired attorney. Her mother, Sandra, wore linen in every season and had opinions about wine that she shared whether you asked or not. They were pleasant enough to me in the beginning. The handshake at Thanksgiving, the polite question about what I did for work, followed by the polite nod when I told them, followed by the conversation moving somewhere else. I noticed things. I always noticed things. I just told myself they didn't matter. The engagement party was at Warren and Sanders' house. I showed up in the suit I'd bought for Brandon's college graduation, which still fit fine. I parked on the street because the circular driveway was full of cars I didn't recognize. Inside, Sandra introduced me to people as Brandon's father, with a pause before the word father that I couldn't quite explain but felt anyway, somewhere in the vicinity of my sternum. Brandon seemed happy. He was laughing at something Warren said, a little too loudly, the way a person laughs when they're trying to belong to a room. I knew that laugh. I'd heard him use it in high school when he was around kids whose parents had more than we did. I told myself it was fine. People adapt. That's what you do. The wedding date was set for the second Saturday in June. The venue was a converted barn event space out in Delaware County, the kind of place that costs $8,500 just for the space rental, and that's before the catering or the flowers or the string lights they drape from the exposed beams. Brandon called me in February, about 4 months before the date. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk to you about something." I was eating a sandwich at my kitchen table. I remember that clearly. Turkey and Swiss on rye, which I'd been making for myself every Sunday for about 15 years. "Vanessa and I were hoping you could help with some of the wedding costs," he said. "Her parents are covering a lot, but there are some gaps." I asked him what the gaps were. He had a list. The catering deposit, $4,200. The photographer, $3,800. The photographer, $3,800. The florist, $2,100. The rehearsal dinner, which they were hosting at a restaurant in Grandview, $2,600. The DJ, $1,400. He went through it like he was reading a grocery list, and I sat there with my sandwich getting warm and said okay to all of it. "I really appreciate it, Dad," he said. "It means a lot to us." I told him, of course. That's what fathers do. I ended up contributing just over $14,000 to that wedding. I took money from savings I'd been building since I was 42. The account I'd started after I got a small settlement from a back injury at work, and decided that instead of spending it, I'd try for the first time in my life to actually save something. $14,000 was about a third of what was in there. I want to be honest with you, I didn't feel resentment about it. Not then. I was proud. I drove out to Delaware County one afternoon to see the barn venue, just to picture where my son was going to get married. And standing in that big empty space with the afternoon light coming through the windows, I felt something I can only describe as full. Like I'd done something right. The week before the wedding, Brandon called again. I almost didn't answer. I was tired from a long week. I'd taken a part-time job at a hardware store after retiring from the plant, just to have somewhere to be, and my back was bothering me. But it was my son, so I answered. "Hey, Dad. So, about the seating for the reception." I said okay. "Vanessa and I have been talking, and we're doing a pretty tight seating plan. Family on both sides, and her parents have a lot of guests, and some of my friends from work." He trailed off. "Brandon," I said, "what are you telling me?" There was a pause that lasted long enough that I put down the book I'd been pretending to read. "We don't really have a seat for you at the reception," he said. "You're on the ceremony list so you can be there for the vows. But the reception is really tight, and Vanessa's family takes up a lot of the family tables. And you're telling me there's no seat for me at your wedding reception?" "It's complicated, Dad." I stayed very quiet for a moment. Outside my window, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. I watched him make a slow turn at the edge of his yard. "I'll be there for the ceremony," I said finally. "We can talk about the rest later." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling fan and running the conversation back through my mind, looking for the part where I'd misunderstood. I didn't find it. The morning of the wedding was a Saturday in June, exactly as planned. The weather was a kind of perfect that feels unfair. Warm, no humidity, a sky so blue it looked painted. I put on my suit. The same one from college graduation, same one from the engagement party. I drove 45 minutes to the barn venue in Delaware County and sat in a folding chair in the third row of the ceremony space. Brandon looked handsome. I'll say that. He stood up at the front with his groomsmen, and when I caught his eye, he gave me a small nod. Just a nod, not a smile. A nod, like I was a colleague he recognized in a parking lot. Vanessa came down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. Warren walked her. Sandra was in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. I watched my son get married from the third row and clapped when everyone else clapped. Afterward, during the cocktail hour on the lawn, I stood near the edge of things and held a glass of water because I hadn't planned on staying and didn't see the point of starting a drink. Brandon was making rounds with Vanessa, shaking hands, accepting hugs. He came over to me once, briefly. "Thanks for coming, Dad," he said. "Of course," I said. He started to move away, and something in me, I don't know what to call it, some combination of 34 years and $14,000 and a Tuesday night when a 9-year-old cried himself to sleep, made me say his name. He turned back. "Am I really not invited to the reception?" I asked. I kept my voice level. I was proud of that. Brandon glanced over his shoulder. Vanessa was about 20 feet away, talking to Sandra, and there must have been something in her posture that he was reading, because when he turned back to me, his jaw had gone a little tight. "Dad, we talked about this. There's just not room. I paid for the reception, Brandon. Dad. The catering, the photographer, the flowers, the DJ. I paid for it." "I know you did, and I appreciate it, but this isn't the time." "When's the time?" People nearby had gotten quiet in that careful way where they're pretending not to listen. Brandon stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "Dad, I need you to not make a scene. Vanessa's family is here. This is our day." I looked at my son. I looked at his face, which I'd watched change from a 7-year-old's face to a man's face, and I tried to find in it something that matched the boy I'd driven home from Little League games. "Okay," I said. I set my water glass down on a nearby table. I walked to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine off. Then I took out my phone. The catering company was a local operation out of Westerville. I dealt with a woman named Well, I'll call her the coordinator, because I've decided to leave names out of this. I had her direct number from when we'd arranged the deposit. She answered on the second ring. I need to cancel the remaining payment authorization on the Holloway wedding, I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. The one scheduled for release at the end of the reception. There was a pause on her end. Mr. Holloway, the reception is currently in progress. I understand that, I said. I'm withdrawing authorization for the final payment, the $2,800 balance. I'm also informing you that I dispute the contract, as the person who contracted and paid is no longer a guest at the event. She told me she'd need to speak with her manager. I told her to take her time. While I waited, I called the photography studio. The photographer had a second payment due at the end of the night. I'd structured it that way on purpose, actually, back when I thought I was being smart about cash flow. Turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did accidentally. I reached his voicemail and left a message canceling authorization, and then I sent an email from my phone saying the same thing. The coordinator called me back. Mr. Holloway, she said, I've spoken with my manager. Given the circumstances, we may need to conclude service at a certain point this evening. I understand, I said. You do what you need to do. I drove home. I changed out of my suit. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in the same chair I sit in every evening, the one by the window that looks out at the street, and I watched the sun go down over the neighborhood. My phone started ringing at about 8:15. Brandon? I let it go to voicemail. Then Vanessa, then Brandon again. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out, based on the voicemail, to be Warren. I listened to Warren's message twice. He was measured the way attorneys are measured, but underneath the measurement was a fury that he was only barely containing. Something about breach of contract. Something about humiliation. Something about making my son's wedding day a disaster. I thought about calling him back. I thought about it for a while. Then I deleted the voicemail and went to bed. I found out later, through Brandon's cousin Tommy, who texted me the following week, what had happened after I left. The catering staff had stopped clearing courses about 45 minutes before the reception was supposed to end. The coordinator had apparently pulled the venue manager aside and explained the situation with the payment. The venue had then informed Brandon privately, which led to a conversation between Brandon and Vanessa that several guests apparently witnessed portions of, which then led to Vanessa's mother making a series of increasingly loud comments about how this family operates, which Brandon's college friend Dave apparently responded to with some comments of his own, and by the time the DJ played the last song, the whole evening had taken on the quality of a slow leak. Tommy said the cake was good, at least. He had 2 slices. I'm telling you this not because I'm proud of the chaos. I want to be honest about that too. There was no moment in any of this where I felt triumphant. What I felt mostly was tired. The particular tiredness that comes not from staying up late, but from spending a very long time pretending something is fine when it isn't. I'd been pretending for years. Pretending I didn't notice the pause before Brandon's father. Pretending I didn't notice when Brandon started referring to Warren as a mentor in conversations. Pretending it was fine when Vanessa asked if I could maybe dress it up a bit more for the engagement party photos. Pretending and pretending and pretending the way a person does when they love someone enough to absorb nearly anything rather than cause a problem. The problem caused itself in the end. That's usually how it goes. Brandon called me on a Tuesday, 8 days after the wedding. He was back from his honeymoon. They'd gone to Cancun, which I had not contributed to for the record. He called from his cell and I answered this time. The conversation started with anger. His, then mine, then both of us talking over each other in the way that accomplishes nothing but at least feels like something. He used the word embarrassed 4 times. He said I had ruined his wedding day. He said he couldn't believe a father would do that to his own son. I waited until he finished. Brandon, I said, I sat in the 3rd row at your wedding. I watched you get married. I shook your hand at the cocktail hour. And then you told me there was no seat for me at the reception I paid for. You told me I wasn't welcome. I told you it was complicated. I know what you told me. Silence. Here's what I want you to think about, I said. Not about the money. Not about the catering company. I want you to think about the 9-year-old version of you. The one who cried every night for 6 months when your mother left. I want you to think about who held you through that. He didn't say anything. I'm not asking you to choose between me and Vanessa, I said. I'm not asking you to choose between me and her family. I'm asking you to think about whether the way you treated me, your father, who has never once in your life not shown up for you, was something you're actually okay with. More silence. I'm going to give you some time, I said, however long you need. But I'm not going to pretend that what happened was acceptable, and I'm not going to keep acting like everything is fine when it isn't. I'm done doing that. I hung up. I want to be clear about something because I'd had months now to sit with all of this, and I think it matters. I was not a perfect father. I gave Brandon everything financially because somewhere in the back of my mind I believed that was how you proved love, that if you just provided enough, if you never let your kid go without, you are doing it right. My own father had been a hard, withholding man, and I'd swung so far in the opposite direction that I forgot to also teach my son the thing my father, in his hard and withholding way, had at least tried to teach me, that nothing in this life is free, that the people who love you are not a resource to be drawn from without limit, and that gratitude is not a feeling. It's a practice. I made Brandon into someone who expected the world to accommodate him. That's on me. I can see it clearly now, and I wish I'd seen it when it would have made a difference. The entitlement that Vanessa's family probably saw in him, the ease with which he accepted things without examining the cost, I built that, dollar by dollar, concession by concession, every time I said yes when I should have said, let's talk about this first. I'm not excusing what he did. I'm saying the picture is complicated, and I think you deserve to know the complicated version. Brandon knocked on my door on a Sunday afternoon in September, about 3 months after the wedding. He was alone. Vanessa wasn't with him. He stood on my front porch in jeans and a flannel, the kind of outfit he used to wear in college before he started wearing the business casual that I think was partly Vanessa's influence, and he looked tired. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee. We sat with the coffee for a while before either of us said anything. I'm sorry, Dad, he said finally. I looked at him. Not just for the wedding, he said. For I've been thinking about what you said, about who held me when I was 9. He stopped, pressed his lips together. I think I got lost somewhere, trying to fit into her family, trying to be a certain kind of person. I don't know when I stopped. I don't know when it became okay to treat you like you were on the outside. I didn't say anything for a moment. My coffee was getting cold. I know I can't fix what happened, he said. No, I said, you can't, but I want to try to. I know, I said. We didn't hug. That's not really how Brandon and I are. We sat there, the two of us, at the same table where I'd been eating turkey sandwiches on Sundays for 15 years. And we didn't say everything that needed to be said because some things take longer than one afternoon. But we stayed at that table for a long time. 2 cups of coffee each. The light changed in the kitchen as the afternoon moved toward evening. At some point, Brandon said, I'm going to pay you back. The 14,000. I shook my head. That's not what this is about. I know, he said, but I want to. I looked at my son, at this man who had once been a 7-year-old asleep in my passenger seat, cleats muddy from a game, the whole of his life still ahead of him, and I thought about all the ways love gets distorted when you're not paying attention, how you can love someone so hard and so wrong at the same time, how the people who hurt us most are usually the people we love most because they're the only ones with that kind of access. We'll figure it out, I said. That's where we are now. Figuring it out. Some days that looks like a phone call. Some days it looks like silence. Brandon and Vanessa are still together. I've been to their apartment twice since September. Once for dinner, once because Brandon needed help with a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink, which it turned out I could fix in about 20 minutes with a wrench and some plumber's tape. Vanessa was polite. Not warm, but polite. I'll take polite for now. I don't know what the future looks like. I'm 63 years old and I've learned enough to know that futures don't arrive the way you picture them. What I know is this. I spent a long time shrinking myself to fit into spaces where I wasn't fully welcome. I spent a long time absorbing what was handed to me without saying out loud that it wasn't acceptable. I don't do that anymore. If that Sunday at the barn venue was the moment I stopped, the moment I sat in my truck with both hands on the steering wheel and decided that some things cannot be paid for and then quietly accepted, then maybe it was the most expensive and the most necessary thing I've ever bought myself. The cake, according to Tommy, really was excellent. I wish I'd had a slice. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, months now. And the thing I keep coming back to isn't the wedding, isn't the catering company, isn't even Brandon standing there in his suit telling me there was no seat for me at the reception I'd paid $14,000 for. The thing I keep coming back to is the turkey sandwich I was eating when he first called to ask for the money. How ordinary that moment was. How completely I said yes without hesitating, without asking a single question, without once considering whether the ease of my yes was doing him any favors at all. That's the part I had to reckon with. There's a version of this story where I'm purely the victim, and for a while I told myself that version because it was easier. But the truth is that what Brandon did at that wedding didn't come from nowhere. It came from 20+ years of me teaching him, without meaning to, that I was a resource rather than a person, that my love was expressed in dollars and that dollars came without conditions. I built the mechanism that eventually turned on me. I can see that clearly now, even if it took getting walked out of my own son's reception to finally see it. The hardest kind of self-examination is the kind where you have to look at the damage you did while trying to love someone. I wasn't a cold father. I wasn't absent. I was the opposite. I was so present, so giving, so determined not to be the withholding man my own father had been, that I swung all the way to the other end and forgot that children need more than provision. They need to learn that the people who love them are also people. That love is not a transaction, but it is also not unconditional in the way we sometimes pretend. It has to be tended. It has to be mutual. When it stops being mutual, something has gone wrong, and pretending otherwise doesn't fix the problem. It just delays it. Courage, I've decided, is not something you only need in dramatic moments. I needed courage every time Brandon asked me for something and I should have said, "Let's talk about whether this is the right choice." I needed courage every time I noticed Sandra's pause before Brandon's father and said nothing. I needed courage at that cocktail hour, asking my son the question I asked him. And I needed it to stay quiet when he answered, to set down my glass and walk away instead of causing a scene that would have proved his point about me. The phone calls from my truck, that was not cruelty. That was a 63-year-old man finally, for the first time in a long time, deciding that he mattered too. Brandon sat at my kitchen table in September and said he was sorry. I believe he meant it. I also know that one September afternoon doesn't undo 34 years of pattern in either of us. We're both learning something we should have learned earlier. That's uncomfortable and it's slow and some days it doesn't look like much at all. But I'm done shrinking. I'm done absorbing. I'm done writing checks, literal or otherwise, for rooms where I'm not welcome. That's not virtue. That's just exhaustion with nowhere left to go. If there's anything I'd want someone watching this to take away, it's just that. Not revenge. Not the satisfaction of a canceled payment. Just the quiet, overdue decision to stop treating your own presence in a room as something that needs to be earned from the people you love most. I sat at my kitchen table with my son and we drank 2 cups of coffee each. The light changed. Nobody fixed everything. But nobody pretended, either. And for a man who spent 30 years pretending, that felt like more than enough to start with.